So it's a very skewed distribution. And in fact, you can talk to Greta Young back there. She's a PhD in stats. She'll tell you a lot more about skewed distributions. She's sitting at the table back in that corner. She'd love to talk about statistics. She really does. So now the next question for you. Who thinks they traveled the furthest to get here?
Adam.
No.
Ooh.
It turns out that the people who have traveled the furthest are my great aunt and uncle, Jean and Eileen. They've traveled 2,543 miles as the crow flies from Pacific Palisades, California. There was a few people who were very close, within a few miles of that, but they are truly the furthest. Now you know that they're also coming here from the furthest west. That's an important point to keep in mind. So who has traveled the least distance to get here? Who thinks they've traveled the least distance? You don't count. You're one of the staff here. Who thinks they've traveled the least distance? Well, it turns out it's the Whitmans, who, as the crow flies, have traveled only 55 miles to get here. 55.3 to be exact. So the next question for you, who thinks they're the southernmost attendee? Nobody wants to think they're the southernmost. It turns out it's Ariel's great aunt and great uncle, Jerry and Yetta. They traveled here from Boca Raton, Florida. So it seems that great aunts and great uncles travel from extreme points to visit weddings. That's a very interesting thing to think about. So speaking of Florida, it's interesting to know we have Floridians and Texans here, but there's no hurricanes this year. We'll talk a lot more about the weather at the end, since that's what we have some statistics on the weather at the end. So who thinks they're the easternmost person? Nobody wants to. Tom, and he's correct. He is the easternmost person. He should win a prize. I don't know if we have any prize for him, but Tom Gurnis, my colleague, and his wife Rima have traveled from the easternmost of anybody here. They're from Quincy, Massachusetts. So congratulations to Tom. So now we get to the northernmost. This gets a little bit interesting because we have a lot of Canadians here. So yes, congratulations to the Canadians. So we can imagine that it's one of the Canadians that came from the furthest north. And you'd be correct. So is it Ariel's grandmother? Is it her aunt on one side or the aunt on the other side? So we'll see. Well, it turns out it's the Lang family. They've traveled from the furthest north to get here today. But I do have to note that my best man, Chris, was in Seattle yesterday, and it turns out Seattle's much further north than Montreal. If you look at a map, maybe people don't realize it, but Seattle's actually 150 miles further north than Montreal. So while we're at it, let's talk a little bit about the north. Canada specifically, because Canada's an interesting place. There's all sorts of legends about Canada. So we have 9 guests here from Canada currently living there. That would be Ariel's grandmother and her 2 sets of aunts and uncles and cousins. But there's 2 other Canadian citizens here, and they're sitting over there. And the US is trying to assimilate them. And Ariel is going to be part of that, because as you know, Ariel is studying for a PhD in health policy, and he's a doctor. So assuming Ariel can really fix the healthcare program, that'll encourage some more Canadians to come to the US. I want to talk a little bit about Ariel and I crossing the Canadian border. I'm about half done with the speech, so don't worry about the time. So as some of you may know, Ariel and I like to go on lots of trips. And as some of you may also know, I like to get the passport stamp whenever I cross a border, or even if it's just to Canada. It's a very good souvenir, it's very reminiscent. I like to look back at my passport. And I do apologize if you've heard this story before. But Ariel and I were crossing from Canada back into the US at the Thousand Islands Bridge up on I-81 in northern New York, where it hits Ontario. And it seems that the only way to get the passport stamp at this particular crossing is to go into the building. Now, this building is where you go when you're a vagrant, or if you don't have an identity, or if you're an illegal immigrant, or something like that. But of course, I wanted the stamp, so I had to take Ariel into this building. And she didn't feel very comfortable in the building. She was a little bit concerned in the building. But we did get our stamp, and we can now say that we are 2 of the only people in the world who have the stamp from this particular port of entry, since it's so difficult to get. And that stamp is going to be very valuable someday, I'm sure. So I also want to talk a little bit more about US Customs and Border Protection. People that let you into the country. And I don't think they like me when I'm alone, but they definitely like me when I'm with Ariel. And I'll give you an example of that. When I was alone last summer, I crossed the border between the US and Canada 4 times within 3 days. Don't ask me why. It's a good reason, but it would take longer than we have here to explain why I would cross the border that many times. But each time I crossed back, they did a thorough search of my car. They went into the trunk, they opened my suitcases, they questioned, oh, why do you have a job in Boston, yet your driver's license says you're from Connecticut? They were very confused about who I was, why I was crossing the border so many times. That happened every time I traveled across the border alone. But then when Ariel was with me, oh, have a good day. Enjoy your ride, drive safely. So obviously she's a good luck charm when it comes to that. But we do have to talk a little more about law enforcement, just very briefly. And that is the time when Ariel and I got pulled over for speeding in Idaho. So we were in Idaho on the way to the World Potato Expo. Everybody goes in there.
WP.
It's a very famous place. They do have the world's largest potato chip there. And they sell plush potatoes, like little stuffed animal potatoes. I bought one for Ariel, but she's lost it. So I was pulled over by this Idaho State Policeman. I looked it up for my ticket. His name was Brady Johnson, if you're interested. But I think the officer thought that I had kidnapped Ariel. No, I'm serious. He was very suspicious of us. Usually when you get pulled over, they would ask for mine as a driver's ID. They would ask for the registration things, but they asked for Ariel's information, why she was with me. And why were we going to the World Potato Expo, even if we were from Connecticut? So eventually I think we convinced them that we were meant to be together, and he let us go on our merry way. I do want to read you a quote, though, from the Idaho State Police website. The mission of the Idaho State Police, and this, you should remember this quote because it'll be important at the very end of the speech. The mission of the Idaho State Police is, in addition to detecting and investigating crime, amongst other things, was to order abatement of public nuisances and to enforce such orders to suppress riots, and this is the key point, to prevent wrongs to children and dumb animals. Yes, it actually says dumb animals, and just keep that in mind as we get back towards the end of the speech. So let's circle back to where everybody's from. So let's make a little game out of this. Let's put each of you at your geocloud, at your home. I put you in your home, and imagine that we all weigh the same. Of course, that's not really true, but imagine we all weigh the same. And we're going to try to figure out where we would all balance. Basically, where is Ariel and I's center of our circle? Where does that exist? Does anybody have any ideas? What state is it in? It's not Idaho.
Pennsylvania.
It's not,
Pennsylvania.
It's not in Indiana. It turns out that it's in Maryland, Western Maryland, in the far, I guess the panhandle of Maryland. So it turns out it's about 30 miles east of Morgantown, West Virginia. Now the next question, Farhan, I'm sorry the answer is not you. Who lives closest to this point? The actual answer is Pearl and Seymour Moskowitz. They are the closest to our center. They live 116 miles from this center. So in preparation for this speech, I went on Google Street View and looked up what this place was like. I mean, what's there? It's very important to Ariel and myself. So I wanted to know what was actually there. And it turns out it's in the Appalachian Mountains. It's over 2,000 feet above sea level. It's a nice place in Western Maryland. And we decided that we should all meet there for our first anniversary. But the best part, this is the best part, there's an airport only 2 miles from the town, from this location. Guess what town it's in? It's in the town of Accident, Maryland. They put an airport in the town of Accident, Maryland. I don't know why. So switching gears a little bit. Now back to a little bit more specifically about Ariel and myself. As of today, we've known each other for 2,969 days, which is a prime number for those keeping track. It really is a prime number. I tried factoring, you can't get anything. It's also related to Ariel's research. As you may or may not know, in the US Congress, when they pass bills, they number each bill. So there's something called House Resolution HR 2969, 2969 being the number of days we've been together. And I did some research on this bill. And it turns out that it's something related to Medicare patient access. And I was like, wow, that's exactly related to what Ariel does. So it's not a coincidence, apparently. I don't really know too much more about the bill, but Ariel will take questions on it at the end of the speech. Just another note on prime numbers. We've known each other for 1 day over 424 weeks. Of course, 424 is not a prime number, but 424 is the sum of 10 consecutive prime numbers.
Ooh.
I'll leave it to you guys to figure out which 10. So some other statistics that may be useful. I've known Ariel for 27.4% of my life, and she's known me for 28.8% of her life. In case you were wondering, on August 11th, 2019, she will have known me for exactly half her life. So mark that date down in your calendar. August 11th, 2019. For me, to say that I've known her for half of my life, we have to wait till May 8th, 2020. So now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the weather, because that's what I'm doing for a career. So for the next bits of information, I use weather station data for the past 40 years, and that comes from the Groton New London Airport, which is the closest official observing station to Cape Town. So of course, you can look outside and see how wonderful the weather is today, which brings us to some questions. What could the weather have been on August 25th? So on August 25th, 1969, the high temperature here was a brutal 90 degrees. That wouldn't have been very comfortable. And 2 years later, in 1971, it hit a low of 45 degrees. That also would not have been so good. In the past 40 years, there have been about 15 years that have some rain. So we were lucky in that sense, no rain. But you go even further, just no clouds at all. And there were only 3 years in the past 40 with no clouds in the sky. So this is the fourth one in 41 years with no clouds on August 25th. So to conclude the speech, I want to connect all the parts. And to do that, we're going to use the turtle swimming. Ariel has had a pet turtle.
Swimming! We love you, swimming!
25 years. The turtle can't be here with us today. It's at home. It had other obligations this weekend. So let's, how can all these parts of the speech fit together? Well, the turtle's from Canada. The turtle was smuggled through U.S. border protection. So that comes into play as well, all of those U.S. border stories. When the weather gets bad, the turtle gets frightened. And this is where I told you to remember that thing about Idaho. As much as I care about the turtle, it really isn't the smartest of animals. I have to say. Basically, it looks to you for food, and then when you give it the food and walk to the other side, it still thinks you're going to give it food, so it follows you and goes away from the food. But it does fall under the jurisdiction of Idaho's police, because Idaho's police are tasked with protecting dumb animals, as we know. So in conclusion, I want to give a big thank you to Abby and Jacques, to my parents. Our parents mean the world to both of us. And we really appreciate everything they've done for us since we were born. In fact, even before we were born. So I'm going to conclude by saying that Ariel and I have been through a lot together. We've gotten stranded in the Costa Rican jungle. We've driven through impenetrable fog in the Azores. Ariel didn't like that. We've seen a majestic bull moose appear out of the middle of nowhere in Ontario. We've gone to many dinners and movies and just lazed around. We've talked about math problems and we've made music together. We prepared matzo balls and fried latkes. And we're very excited about the next stages in our adventure. So enjoy the rest of the evening. Eat, drink, dance, mingle. And don't drop us when you lift us up during the hora. That's very important. Whoever's going to be lifting the chairs, do not drop us. But most of all, thank you everybody for coming to be here with us tonight.
Yeah.